In this video, I'd like to talk about the limits to results structure. This is a variation of the basic goal-seeking structure, where the structure itself is attempting to bring a balance between the desired state and the current state. The action is intended to move the current state in the direction of the desired state. For the limits to results structure, there's some sort of a constraint on the action. More often than not, the gap between the desired state and current state require an amount of action that simply can't be completed in a single time step. Consider, you have a project that requires 100 hours worth of work and you have one person to do it. I mean, they're not going to do it tomorrow. It's going to take a number of days for them to do it, depending upon how many hours they're going to work per day. So the constraint is simply a limitation on the action. So when the gap is larger than the constraint, the amount of action that can be applied is the value of the constraint. And when the gap is then smaller than the constraint, the amount of action is dependent upon the gap. And you'll see that better when I talk about the simulation structure, which is represented here being the parallel of this qualitative diagram, whereby the gap, which is simply the desired state minus the current state, and the action, which is a little bit more complex, is an if-then-else statement that says that if the gap is greater than or equal to the constraint, then use the value of the constraint, otherwise use the gap. So that depending upon how the comparison between these two, either the action is the value of the constraint or the value of the gap. So when you simulate this, you notice that for a certain period of time, the current state is progressing in a linear manner, because the action is a constant. It's a value of the constraint, which in this case is 0.3. So each time step, the constraint limits the amount of action, and therefore you end up with a linear progression towards the desired state, and the gap gets smaller in the same fashion, same manner that the action. Though once you get to a point where the gap is smaller than the constraint, the project or the current state moves to the desired state in the next time step. The chunky nature of this graph is specifically because I set the simulation time step at 1, so that when you interact with this graph or with this simulation, you can alter that and make it 0.5, 0.25, 0.125, and see what kind of an impact or an influence that has on the way the graphs look when you run the simulation. So I would encourage you to come to this particular simulation model in Insight Maker and change the values of the current state, desired state, and the constraint, and run the simulation and change the time settings simulation time step from 1 to 0.5, 0.25, 0.125, and simply interact with this structure on an ongoing basis to develop a feel for the way that it behaves. You're welcome to clone this model and make whatever changes you would like to so that it could be some specific case of the limits to results structure. So hope you found this informative, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.